8,000 people arrive on Sunday morning. Cars fill enormous parking lots. Children disappear into dedicated activity centers. A full band walks onto a stage covered in LED screens. Cameras switch on. The sermon is streamed across several campuses and watched online by thousands more. Nobody bought a ticket. And yet, by Monday morning, hundreds of thousands of dollars may have moved through the organization. From the outside, this can look like an almost perfect business. The audience comes voluntarily. The main product can be delivered to thousands of people simultaneously. Donations may be tax deductible. The organization can accumulate valuable land, buildings, media equipment, and cash reserves. And at the center of everything may be one famous pastor whose name is practically inseparable from the church. So you might assume that pastor owns it. They usually don't. In the typical American nonprofit structure, there are no shares. No founder can own 70% of the church and later sell that stake. A tax-exempt church cannot simply distribute its profits to private owners. The pastor may control major decisions. They may earn a substantial salary. They may become personally wealthy through books, speaking, or media. But the church itself belongs to the nonprofit organization, which creates a strange economic system. You can build something worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You can control it. You can become the face of it. But you cannot simply sell it and pocket the money. So if ownership is not the prize, what actually makes a megachurch economically powerful? The answer begins with something much less visible than the building. Researchers generally describe a megachurch as a Protestant congregation attracting at least around 2,000 people to weekly worship. But the modern megachurch is increasingly not one gigantic auditorium. It is a network. Recent Hartford Institute research found that roughly 2/3 of American megachurches operate multiple locations. That matters because the economics change once one organization can spread the same infrastructure across several campuses. Instead of every location creating everything from scratch, one central organization can handle finance, accounting, branding, websites, sermon preparation, donor systems, and parts of media production. A sermon created once may be delivered live in one location, rebroadcast to another campus, and streamed online. The church is no longer scaling only through seats. It is scaling through replication, and that begins to resemble something familiar from the business world. One restaurant has one kitchen. A restaurant chain creates a system and reproduces it. A modern megachurch can do something similar, not by franchising ownership, but by centralizing leadership and repeating the operating model. But there is one enormous difference. Restaurants charge customers. Megachurches generally do not, which means the entire network depends on converting participation into voluntary giving. That is the hidden engine. The latest large-scale Hartford research found median annual megachurch income in the millions of dollars, with individual donations providing the overwhelming majority of revenue. And increasingly, those donations are electronic. That may sound like a small technological detail. It is not. Online, giving changes church cash flow in almost the same way subscriptions changed many consumer businesses. A person who gives manually once in a while behaves very differently from someone who sets up an automatic recurring contribution. The second person creates predictable income. Consider a purely illustrative example. Suppose a church averages 8,000 people across its physical campuses and online community. Not all of them donate. Not all attend every week. Some may give nothing. Others may give occasionally. But suppose 2,000 households decide to contribute an average of $250 per month. That is $500,000 every month. $6 million per year. And unlike a business, the church did not need to sell $6 million of merchandise to generate it. It needed to maintain $6 million worth of willingness to give. That distinction changes everything. Because economically, the person sitting in the audience is not really a customer. There may be no transaction at all. The more important relationship is trust. If people believe in the mission, leadership, and community strongly enough, revenue appears voluntarily, which is why a church can be packed and still have weak finances. Attendance is visible. Giving commitment is not. And this leads directly to one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding megachurches. If nobody owns the profits, how do some pastors become rich? The church's money and the pastor's money are not the same thing. A senior pastor may receive compensation from the organization, and ministers can qualify for specific housing-related tax treatment under federal rules when properly structured. But the more interesting money may exist outside the church. A prominent pastor may write best-selling books. They may receive speaking fees. They may own intellectual property. They may operate separate media businesses or receive royalties, depending on the arrangements involved. So a pastor could theoretically become extremely wealthy, while technically owning 0% of the church. And the reverse is also possible. A church could control enormous assets, while its senior pastor lives relatively modestly. That is why judging the economics from the pastor's lifestyle alone can be misleading. The real financial statement belongs to the institution. And once the organization reaches megachurch scale, that institution can become extremely expensive to operate. Walk through a large church campus, and the costs become easier to understand. There may be dozens or hundreds of employees, pastors, administrators, accountants, musicians, video editors, graphic designers, children's ministry workers, security, cleaning crews, IT staff, facility managers. Then come the buildings, mortgage payments or leases, electricity, air conditioning, insurance, maintenance, parking, sound systems, cameras, LED screens, software, live stream infrastructure. Some churches operate schools, food programs, counseling services, international missions, and community projects. Others run conferences and produce large amounts of media. And every additional campus creates another layer of recurring expenses. So although tax exemption matters, calling the church simply a tax-free business misses the important part. Tax exemption does not make payroll free. It does not make electricity disappear. It does not eliminate debt. And it does not mean every commercial activity automatically escapes taxation. What exemption does change is what happens to the money left over. A normal company can eventually distribute profits to shareholders. A church cannot simply turn excess revenue into dividends. That money can instead stay inside the institution. It can become cash reserves. It can pay down debt. It can buy property. It can fund another campus. And that is where financially disciplined megachurches can become surprisingly powerful. They can compound institutional wealth without having an owner extracting profits. Life Church shows the scale this can reach. According to financial data, it voluntarily reports through the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. Life Church received roughly $282 million in cash donations in 2024 and ended the year with more than $600 million in assets. That is not a normal megachurch. It is an extreme example, but it proves the model can reach corporate scale. And corporate scale creates corporate-sized risks. The dangerous number is not attendance. It is fixed cost. A church can reduce some spending when donations fall. It can postpone a conference, freeze hiring, cut advertising, reduce programs. But other costs remain. Mortgage payments still arrive. Buildings still need maintenance. Full-time employees still expect salaries. Equipment leases still exist. Utilities continue. Debt does not care whether Sunday attendance was disappointing. Recent Hartford research found that many megachurches carry debt, with reported median debt among indebted churches measured in the millions of dollars. Debt is not automatically bad. If donations are growing, borrowing can help fund a new campus before enough cash has accumulated to build it outright. But borrowing effectively makes a bet on future donor confidence. And unlike a corporation, the church cannot rescue itself by selling new shares to investors. There is no equity market waiting. When cash becomes tight, the options are much narrower. Ask members for more. Run a fundraising campaign. Borrow again. Refinance. Sell property. Cut employees. Cut programs. And this is where trust stops being a soft religious concept and becomes a hard financial variable. Because once trust falls, the decline can feed itself. Giving falls. Management cuts programs and staff. The experience becomes weaker. Members disengage. Giving falls again. Fixed costs remain. More cuts follow. The building can still be full enough to look successful from the outside, while the organization underneath it is becoming financially fragile. And one of America's most famous megachurches eventually discovered exactly how brutal that feedback loop can become. Robert Schuller's ministry began in 1955 in a California drive-in theater. It was an unusual idea from the beginning. People could attend church without leaving their cars. Then television transformed the model. In 1970, Schuller launched the Hour of Power, eventually turning a local church into an international media ministry. A decade later came its physical symbol, the Crystal Cathedral, an enormous glass sanctuary in Garden Grove, California. The building did more than house worship services. It became part of the product. It looked spectacular on television. And at the ministry's peak, the broadcast reached millions of people. The system appeared powerful from almost every angle. A famous pastor, a globally recognized program, a landmark building, a large donor base, and enormous visibility. Then several pieces started moving in the wrong direction at the same time. Schuller stepped back from senior leadership in 2006. His son succeeded him, but left the position in 2008 after disagreements. Leadership became less stable. Then the financial crisis hit. Household wealth fell. Charitable giving came under pressure. And the Crystal Cathedral's revenue began declining. In 2008, the ministry reported roughly $30 million in revenue. By 2009, that figure had fallen to around $22 million, a decline of roughly 27% in 1 year. For a small organization, losing $8 million would be severe. For an organization built around expensive property, television production, employees, and debt, it was much worse. The ministry began cutting. Employees were laid off. Property was put up for sale. Television distribution was reduced. Major productions were canceled. But this is the problem with fixed costs. You can cut spending. You cannot always cut it as fast as revenue disappears. Vendors were still owed money. Mortgage obligations still existed. And by October 2010, Crystal Cathedral Ministries filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It reported more than $43 million in debt. Roughly $36 million of that was tied to a mortgage. Another several million dollars were owed to vendors and other creditors. Think about what had happened. The building was still famous. The church was still recognizable. The institution had decades of history. But the economic machine connecting audience, donations, and fixed costs had broken. And then came the most revealing moment. In 2011, a bankruptcy judge approved the sale of the Crystal Cathedral campus to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange. Price, $57.5 million. The building survived. The organization that made it famous lost control of it. That is the economics of a megachurch in one transaction. The building looked like the asset, but the building could not save the system. The Crystal Cathedral story does not mean every large church is heading toward collapse. Far from it. Recent research suggests many megachurches have emerged from the pandemic financially stronger, with giving growth outpacing both attendance growth and inflation in many cases. A strong megachurch can use scale incredibly well. Central administration can serve multiple campuses. Digital giving can stabilize cash flow. Large reserves can reduce dependence on banks. Expansion can be funded gradually rather than through aggressive borrowing. And thousands of donors can spread financial risk across a huge community. That is the best-case model. Then there is the realistically successful model. Several million dollars in revenue. A large staff. One or several campuses. Responsible debt. Reasonable reserves. Most revenue spent on operations and ministry, with enough left over to strengthen the balance sheet. Then comes the vulnerable version. Attendance still looks impressive. The building still looks expensive. The pastor still draws crowds. But expansion happened too quickly. Debt is high. Reserves are thin. The organization needs giving to keep increasing, simply to maintain everything it has already built. That can work for years, until growth stops. And finally, there is the failure scenario. Leadership problems weaken trust. Giving falls. Fixed costs remain high. Debt removes flexibility. Cuts damage the member experience. More people leave. Eventually, valuable property has to be sold just to settle obligations. What looked permanent can unravel surprisingly quickly. So what do you actually own when you own a megachurch? Usually, nothing in the conventional business sense. You do not hold equity. You cannot sell shares. You cannot build the church for 30 years, sell it for $300 million, and retire with the proceeds. What leadership can possess is something different: control, influence, a platform, the ability to direct enormous flows of money and resources toward a mission, and potentially a personal brand that creates wealth outside the nonprofit itself. But the institution only remains powerful while people voluntarily support it. That is why the most important asset does not appear on the balance sheet. It is not the auditorium, not the cameras, not the land, not even the size of Sunday's crowd. It is the relationship between the institution and the people willing to finance it. Break that relationship, and an impressive building can become an expensive liability. Protect it, and a nonprofit with no shareholders can grow into an organization controlling hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. That is the contradiction at the center of the entire system. A megachurch may look like a giant business, but economically, it runs on something businesses normally cannot ask customers to provide for free: trust. And in the economics of a megachurch, trust is not just what fills the seats. It is what keeps the lights on.